Morning guys, so today we've got a head gasket job on my car again, so fun, let's go and do it. This is how to do an head gasket on your Ford Zetec engine. This applies to the 1.6, the 1.8 and the 2 litre as found in the Escort and Mark 1 and Mark 2 Mondeo, and all Zetecs are basically the same for this. So yeah, we're doing a head gasket today. On the button. Yeah. Right, let's go and get this head gasket sorted. So here we are. If you've got a strut brace fit, you need to remove that first, like I have. I've already gone around, I've unplugged, well, I've got all the wiring unplugged from across the injectors and the top temperature sensor and the lower temperature sensor and the coil pack. You've got the injectors, throttle position sensor and idle control valve and the cam sensor to unplug. You've also got, and these come off, the throttle cable, which just unhooks like that and then pulls out. And in my case, the dipstick, which is here, which it normally wouldn't be, it'd normally be over here, but because I've got the Focus ST 170 exhaust manifold, it sits in the middle now. So pull that out, like so, and there's your dipstick tube. As I say, all the water hoses, the radiator hose, the bypass hose, and the vent hose back to the extension tank all need unplugging, because we've got a rip basically from down there and across, so everything up there off. That's where we're up to at the moment. Next we'll take the cam covers off. So the cam covers are 1, 2 bolts, and then you've got 1 and 2, and then is a third one down here behind the water pump. Well, not quite behind the water, just above the water pump pulley. I'll zoom in. You can just see that little divot there. That's where the bolt goes in that holds the lower timing cover on. Now, what I'm going to be doing in this case, I'm going to be leaving my ancillary belt on. Normally, you'd have to remove that, but because my top timing cover has been trimmed, I can take that off without having to remove the serpentine belt and the water pump pulley. Otherwise, you've got to remove that and the water pump pulley because it sits sort of inside the pulley, but because mine's been trimmed, which I'll show you when it's off, you can just about see, it'll slide off without removing the water pump pulley. Normally, I'd recommend you also do a time belt at the same time as this because we have got to remove it, but I'm not doing that because this belt isn't all that old, and to do that, you'd have the water pump pulley off, the serpentine belt off, and the lower timing covers. Normally you'd also have a power steering pump up here and a power steering bolt here, but I don't have power steering on this car, so I don't. So yeah, I'm leaving the intake manifold on. Exhaust manifold's got to come off, but that will just slide forward enough that I can take the head off. So timing cover off, and then we've got to take the rocker cover off. That's where we're up to. Right, so where we're now at, I've got the exhaust manifold off, I have disconnected the injector rail, and I've removed the rocker cover. Everything else is all unplugged. So I have undone these 2 bolts, and what these do is they loosen off these cam pulleys, so they'll spin freely from the cam. You have to do that to set the timing, and you have to do it before you take the belt off, because you won't be able to have the tension to undo these. So you can see now I've loosened these off. They're a Torx 55-bit. You can pick these up from Halfords or whatever separately. And just give the cam pulley a little wiggle, just loosen it off like that. Now your timing is loosened. So you're going to undo this down here now, which is going to undo the tensioner. That's a 17 mil. You can also get a Torx 50-bit on there, which is ideal for the final nipping up, but just for loosening it. And as you can tell, it's very tight. Oh, it is very tight. But it's a 17 mil spanner, so I know my spanners by size because they're coloured, but that's why I was able to just pick it up. But basically, you just got to undo that, which is very tight on mine, so I might have to get a ratchet on that by the looks of it. Oh, then once that's off, we can slide the belt off, and then we've got to start removing the camshafts, which are these here. These are e-sockets. If you've got a Halford socket set, you've got them up here. They're basically like an inverted Torx, like that. And it's an E12 socket you need, and they'll fit straight on, and then you undo all of the cam caps. Make sure you keep them in order though, because they have to go back in the right spot. But that's where we're up to. So I'll loosen that tensioner off, and I'll start loosening all the cam caps off, and then I'll be back. Right, I've got all of the cam cap bolts out now, so some of them will just lift off. I've already loosened these ones, so they will just lift off. These end ones tend to be a bit of a pain. You can see these I haven't touched yet aren't moving. Now a little trick to get these loose, little hammer, gentle tap side to side. There you go, and it pops loose, and you can just relieve it like that. Don't go too harsh on them because you don't want to break them. But there you go, they're all apart now. So you want to make sure these stay in order because they wear to the cam. It's not majorly important as if like a bottom end, for example, being all correct, but it's still, it's not like detrimental if you get mixed up, but it's still good practice. You don't want to get that the wrong way round. It's not the end of the world, but it's not good practice. So make sure you retain them in the correct order. The cams don't matter, you can't mix them up because the intake one has a little notch there that lines up with the cam sensor. The exhaust one doesn't, so you can't mix them up. It's pretty idiot-proof built engine, to be honest. They're very straightforward and easy. So let me get these off, and then I'll be back. Right, with the cam caps removed, we can just pull the belt free, and then now the camshafts will lift out just like that, and then obviously lift them out and go and put them somewhere safe. So I'm putting them just around the corner on the grass, just so I don't get oil on the drive, and also they're nice and safe and protected. Well, nobody's going to go around there, so it's not going to be an issue. And now you've got the 10 head bolts, which are down there. These are the same Torx 55 we used earlier. So short extension onto that, and then big bar, crack them off. They are quite tight, obviously. And once this is off, we can get the head off. These are your head bolts, these big beefy things. Now, because of the amount of torque that are put into these to hold the head down, the amount of pressure that these are under, these should be replaced every now and again. Different manufacturers have different intervals. Ford state these can be reused up to twice. That means once they've been fitted to the engine, you can remove them and put them back in 2 times. And each time they're reused, they should have a dimple put on them. I replaced these and I've reused them. This will now be the second time I'm reusing them. I've already done it once, so I put these in, I took them out, I've put them back in, and now I've took them out again. So I can reuse these one more time, and that's it. If you've never done this before, I recommend you replace these bolts, because in the case of like me, where you haven't got the tools to put a dimple on, you won't mark them. I've kept a mental note. You don't know for definite how many times they've been in and out. So it's always best practice to replace these unless you've put them in and know how long they've been done. And if they're under high stress applications, such as with a turboed engine or an engine that gets raced or something like that, you should obviously replace them every time. In this case, I'm going to reuse them, and this is the last time I'm going to reuse them because it's okay according to specifications, because this will be the second time. They're okay to use one last time, and then if I do this the next time, I'll have to replace these bolts. But for now, I'm going to reuse these, but obviously I'd recommend that people replace these when you do this job. They can be picked up for pennies for what they cost, for what they are, for the sake of what they do and the risk associated. Because if these snap off in the engine, it's game over. It's going to need the engine out and either drilling and retapping, or quite possibly a new engine, which is one of the reasons why this car's had a new engine in the first place. In the very beginning, was because one of the head bolts snapped off in the block. So make sure to replace these if you aren't sure, unless you definitely know for definite you can reuse them. I'm going to. It's not best practice, but there's the bolts out, which means now the last step is to get the head off. Now these can be quite tough. I've disconnected everything from the intake manifold. I'm leaving the intake manifold on for simplicity, but grab and give a good wiggle to whatever you can. And as you can see, it still seems solid, like it's bolted down. It's not. You've only got these 10 bolts. It's just the sheer weight it's been under, and the gasket's working as like a glue now to hold it down. So it's going to take a lot of rocking and a lot of pulling, but eventually it will come out. I can't record this because I need both hands to do this, otherwise I would. But here you go. Now for the head off. Don't have to remove the tappets, although be aware if you flip the engine over, the head over, they will drop out. They are only just seated in there. You can see I can pull these out. It doesn't matter what order they go back in, because these are hydraulic on the silver tops. On the black tops it does, because they're shimmed, they're solid lifters. On the silver tops, however, they are hydraulic, self-adjusting, so it doesn't matter which position you put them back in if they do come out. You don't have to take them out, but if you do, then you haven't got to worry about them folding out if you put the head on its side. Equally, if you put the head on its side, they will fall out. So just make sure you keep an eye and make sure all 16 of them are still there. Head's lifted free now. Silly me, I forgot. Heater matrix hose. Disconnect off the back of the thermostat housing. That's just stopped me from being able to pull the engine out. The head, sorry, not the engine. But yeah, it's free now. So I'm going to disconnect the heater matrix hose, and then I'm going to bring myself a nice pathway over to where I can get this over here safely, because that will drip oil. So make sure you've got plenty of stuff down wherever you're moving it, or you don't mind it getting oily. Obviously on a driveway it will stain and make a mess. So I now need to prepare, ready for moving that. And there we go, the head is off. Here's the old gasket. As you can see, it's well and truly being cooked. It's just gone absolutely everywhere. It's gone there, it's gone there, it's gone there, it's completely well and truly gone there. It's just leaking absolutely everywhere. This was just not, it'd have sealed better not having a gasket at all. Everything looks okay in here still, which is all good. As you can see, we're not at top dead center, so we've got to set up the timing, but that's okay. Taking a look at the head, I forgot we have got to flip this over because we've got to check and clean up underneath. So all of the tappets are going to fall out. Let me get a piece of cardboard. Okay, and there we go. There's the bottom. So you can see all the valves are seated nicely because there's no cam in, so none of the valves are going to be held open. They should all be sealing. It all looks like an engine, really. There's not a lot you can tell by looking at it. The main thing is whether this head is warped. What that means is instead of it being flat, it's misshaped. Normally what you'd have is you'd have it sent off and have the head decked. But a lot of people, when they're doing a driveway job, such as myself, we won't do that. We'll just give it a very good clean up with a flat surface, and hopefully it will be okay. So yeah, as you can see, there's gasket material still stuck to this. So this does need a good clean up. It's very in need of a clean up. Yeah, I've left the spark plugs in. There's no need to take them out. What we can see and tell how the engine's been running based off the colour of the spark plugs and the exhaust valves. Now I'm not entirely sure. The spark plugs look clean, they look okay. They've got a bit of a build-up of orangey sort of stuff on them, but that might be from the head gasket leaking water into the combustion chamber is what it might be. I don't know. I'm not clued up on spark plug colours just like that. I sort of have to look them up. But yeah, this is where we're at. So now we're ready to clean everything up and rebuild it. So we need to get all this oil off, clean all this up, all this oil, make it nice and clean, and then we'll get a flat block of wood and some decent sandpaper and start sanding it flat and clean, and then we'll check it as best as we can with a straight edge, but it won't be anywhere near accurate, but we'll check as best we can with the flat edge to make sure the head isn't obviously warped. If it is, then obviously we know we've got a problem. This is never gonna be right. As long as it's not obviously warped with the straight edge, there's a good chance with it being a decent gasket it will be okay, but obviously we don't know for 100% definite, so we'll just have to see. But yeah, this is how we are. It's time to get cleaning. For cleaning, WD-40 and some blue roll. WD-40 is great at surfacing oil. It cleans up oil and it brings it to the surface, so then when you wipe it down with the paper towel, it pretty much rubs off very cleanly. Sorry, I'm not showing that. It rubs off very cleanly, versus if you hadn't have used the WD-40, it'll take a bit of back and forth, whereas with the WD-40 you can pretty much just wipe it like that and it all comes off. So inside the combustion chamber isn't too important that that's clean, because it'll burn off when we start the engine anyway. But what we don't want is it getting stuck on the spark plugs either. And while I'm here and I've got access, I'll check the gap of the spark plugs, just to make sure they're okay in spec. So the spec for Zetec engines is about 1.3 mil or 50 thou. I do them to that anyway. So this is all cleaned up now to the minimum we need. So now we're going to get some coarse-ish, not too coarse, but we want coarse-ish so it cleans it up, sandpaper and a block of wood. So I've got the block of wood and I've got me some, well, emery cloth, but we'll start with the coarser stuff and we'll work down finer, just to bring it a nice let me just drag this. A nice good finish for the gasket to make to. So get the blue roll out road, block of wood and the paper. So let's see what we've got left for a starter. Right, so the head's all cleaned up and the block's all cleaned up. So at this point, we're pretty much ready to put the new gasket on, which I've got here. This is obviously only go on one way, but before that, I was gonna wind it over by hand, set the top dead center up, ready for timing it, and just clean out all these bores as well. I'm not 100% happy. This block has clearly been decked or something at some point, and they're quite bad because your nail goes in, but they're running across the surface from the combustion chamber across to all the ports, and it's like, no wonder that can't be helping it seal when they're like that. So but it's fine. It has been fine until it overheated, but I don't know. We'll just have to see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, we can have a quick look around the engine bay while we're here, and you can see around how much space there is everywhere. Obviously, you've got the starter motor. That's my oil pressure sensor for the dashboard, and yeah, this gearbox needs to come out because the gearbox has seen better days, but I can't do that. I can't find them. I can't find any, so I can't do it at the moment because I ain't got one. So I'm waiting to find a gearbox to do that, which is another fun job. But for now, head gasket. So if you look at the crank pulley, oh, the wheel's in the road. Let me turn this full lock. Right, so I've got me a 17mm socket. I've put the driver's wheel full lock so we can get to the crank pulley. Now the crank pulley has two markings on it. that first one and the second one. That second one lines up with that mark on sump, the line on sump, and that indicates top dead centre. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to try and show you, but it may not work. So I'm going to put that on. Oh, hang on, it's not 17, sorry, it's 18. Bear with me. Right, 18, here we go. So, we're going to put that on the crank pulley. Oh, come on, there we go. And now we're going to rotate it over until there's the first mark. And there's the second mark lined up. So, oh, drop that. See how the first mark's pointing down? Second mark lines up with the mark on the sump, that line. That indicates cylinder 1 and 4 is at the top dead centre. As we can see, it's at the top, it's at the top, them two are at the bottom, which means we're at top dead centre. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find absolute top dead centre, but this is top dead centre, so this is where you would line up to set the timing. So basically, as this is now, that mark's lined up, this piston's at the top, this piston's at the top, those two at the bottom. We're now ready to reassemble and time the engine up. As it's starting to rain, it's time to put the new gasket on. You can't mess these up, they only go on one way. Some gaskets are labelled saying top, but you can't mess them up, they only go one way. So I think the old one was labelled saying top somewhere, yeah. So it's got top written on it there, but you can't mess them up, they only go on one way. So there's the old one. Here's the new one. So, you look, can't be that way, because none of the ports line up. So it's got to be that way. But you can't mess it up anyway, because it won't sit on the engine the wrong way. So, for example, if I try and put it on this way, it doesn't line up. It quite obviously doesn't line up. So we know it's got to go this way. And there it is, there's your gasket fitted. So now it's time to finish rebuilding. Well, put the head on and get the engine rebuilt. There we go. Right, we're at top dead centre, which means we can slap the head on and then we can time everything up and be ready to start. Absolutely horrible weather, but the head is now on. I've reassembled all of the plugs and hoses and stuff like that, and I've got all of the head bolts just started. So we're going to tighten up in a pattern going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They are 45 Newton meters, then 90 degrees for the torque setting. So that means 45, 45, 45, 45, 45, 45, 45, 45, 45, 45, and then 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90. Right, let's get that done, then we can time up the engine, get the last few bits together, and start it up. Head bolts are all torqued up, so now we've got to put the tappets in. It's as simple as, grab it, don't drop it on the floor, and drop it into the hole. Now, because they are a tight fit, they can be a little bit awkward to get there to drop in, but when they're lined up, they will just drop into place. Just as simple as that. Now, once you've got all of these in, what you should really do is, well, what you should really do anyway is, rather than leaving them out like this, you should leave them in a bucket of oil for them to soak in. Otherwise, what's going to happen, and it's not a big issue because I'm going to deal with it in a sec. What's going to happen is when you crank it over, you're going to have to wait for the oil pressure to build up, for these to pump up and actually start actuating the valves. So when you first wind it over, it'll sound like it has no compression because the valves aren't opening. and it will take about 30 seconds of cranking to pump these up, and then it will start up. It might be a bit ticky for a while because these have got to adjust, but that's basically what will happen if you don't leave them in oil. You basically just got to crank it over for 30 seconds or so before it will start up, and basically just turn the key and hold the key and let it wind over and wind over and wind over and wind over until it fires into life. Pardon that. So, mine haven't been sat in oil, so we're going to have to wind it over and wind it over. That's not a problem. Just make sure you've got a good battery. Mine's not the best, but we'll go with it. So now all of them are in, we can get rid of this manky old bit of cardboard and bring the cams back over. So check the end. That's the exhaust one because it hasn't got the thing on it. Get a bit of grass out of there. Right, the camshafts are in. I haven't put the cam cap top piece bearing it's in yet, because what I recommend is timing it up now, otherwise it'll be a bit difficult to turn the cams. So you got this flat edge here and that flat edge there, and basically you want that to line up with the edge there. So the timing tool basically just goes into that edge of the cam and just locks it to the end. You don't have to buy the specific timing tool. You can use just a straight bit of metal that goes in there. So I use a steel rule and this bit of a draw rail runner. I've kept hold of these because it's perfect for doing these engines. So that will basically just slide in there and that will lock the top end. We know the bottom end's at top dead center, so now we lock the top end. That's the timing set. We put the belt on, the pulley's free spin, so we can take out the tension of the belt, and then its job's a good one. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting the cam covers back on, put the bolts in place. I'm going to start tightening them down, making sure these cams stay roughly about there, because they are awkward to move when the pressure's on them, and then lock them in place. The weather's really not on our side today, and it's getting a little bit late, but this will be done by tonight, because I'm pretty much there. All I've got to do is just time up the engine and put the exhaust manifold back on. That's pretty much everything. Strut brace as well, well that's not exactly the end of the world. I can get the engine running, warming up, bleed the system while I'm doing the last few bits. So yeah, let me crack on with this, get them cam bolts on, the cam shaft, journal, what's my Judars, get the bolts in, and then I'll come back and show you how we're timing it up. Right, the cams are all torqued down. So head bolts, 40 Newton meters, then 90 degrees. Cam bolts, 20 Newton meters. So bottom end is at top dead center. Top end is locked in. So now, just got to route the belt around the tensioner and around the pulleys. Just like that. And this is why the pulleys are free spinning, so you can pull it, take the slack out of the belt when you tighten up the tensioner. So to tighten up the tensioner, Allen key in there, twist it round until the slack's taken out the belt. You should have 45 degrees at the top, 90 degrees down there with a bit of a push. And then that's all tightened up enough. Rocker cover on, spark plug leads on, exhaust manifold on, air intake on, throttle cable on, water in, we're ready to start. Oh, and timing covers. Right, let me tighten up the belt and then I'll be back. Right then, it's all back together. So, it's time for moment of truth. Like I say, it's going to wind over for about 30 seconds or so until the hydraulic tappets pump up with oil. But nevertheless,